Hello, my name is Reed Silverne, and the name of the show is Fed Pride. And the reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and I'm proud of it. This show may or may not be getting actually out in the air today. I don't know. Gremlins have been working on the innards of the cable system, just like the Gremlins have been working at the innards of the federal government. It's hard to say whether it'll be working or not. I noticed that my numbers haven't gone on, so that means that the show may not truly have started. But if it does, I want to say that even though I am a federal worker, that no government agency of the federal government or public affairs officer has approved of what I'm about to say, and not only do they don't know what I'm about to say, I don't even know what I'm about to say. Although I do have a few choice words towards some of the people that are running our government today and that are causing the present situation. As all federal workers know, there's furlough 2, the second furlough is occurring, just like a bad remake of a poor horror movie. In this case, there are fewer federal workers, but they may be in worse shape because fewer people are paying attention, and therefore there's more possibility that this could go sour. And we don't know that it won't. Anything can happen, and let me give you a few rundowns on what did happen. Basically, within the last so many days, there have been White House negotiations between Panetta, who's the chief of staff, Rivlin, the chief budgeteer in the White House, and the chiefs of the House and Senate Republicans. This has been going on and off for a few weeks. At the beginning, they were separated by about $800 billion. That separation came down to the order of $430 billion. And the basic charge was that the president wasn't using the famous CBO figures. And everybody was waiting for the CBO, which is the Congressional Budget Office, to come in with a new set of numbers and a set of numbers that would once and for all result in final completion of the cycle. And sure enough, the CBO on December 12th did come out with new numbers, and they increased the amount of revenue expected over the next 7 years for $135 billion. And that gave both sides a little bit of leeway. And did they use the leeway? Well, the Republicans did use the leeway to some extent. They changed their offer from cuts of $750 billion net to cuts of $661 billion. The president's plan was about $385 billion. It's unclear from the figures that I'm looking at whether the president's plan reflected the $130 billion cut or not. I believe it did. There's still a difference of about $280 billion. Now, out of that $280 billion, of course, the tax cuts alone that the Republicans are pushing, which includes a tax cut on families, $500 per child tax cut, an increase to the earned income tax credit on the working poor, and various other things, including a reduction in the capital gains tax, which would be quite considerable, from about 28% to 19.8% for the wealthiest. Basically, it would take half of your capital gains and make it not taxable, and then tax the other half at the full rate that you are at. And what that would do is, if you were very wealthy, you'd be taxed at the full 28%, and that means that that other half would bring it down, the net, to 19.8. If you weren't very wealthy, your tax break might be down to 14 or 15%. So that's pretty considerable. And then there was another tax break for heirs that increased the deduction or the shielded amount of an estate that would be passed on from $600,000 up to $750,000. And that, of course, is pretty good for wealthier people and people with decent-sized estates, and also people who can expect to inherit a decent-sized estate. So that's another alternative that the Republicans had out. Now, the net effect of the Republican tax cuts were $221 billion. And, of course, that comes to $245 billion if you take into account that the amount is offset by increases, basically, in the taxes for the working poor by decreasing the earned income tax credit. Now, during the whole course of the negotiation, the Republicans only cut that tax cut by $4.8 billion. To $217 billion. So that's pretty small. So the real issue still is, were the Republicans about to give in on the tax cut, and was Clinton about to increase his reductions? And apparently Clinton did increase some of the reductions. His cuts in Medicare were up to $97 billion. The Republicans had made a move from $225 billion cut to $201 billion cut. In Medicaid, Clinton pretty much wasn't moving at all. He had only cut $37 billion, and the Republicans had moved $16 billion from a $132 billion cut to a $116 billion cut, but it didn't look like they were willing to change the drastic way in which they were going to change Medicaid by turning it into a block grant and just giving it away to the states, and not really even requiring the states to match or to have universal standards. So that was a big problem over there. Basically, another plan has come up, and the 6 moderate Democrats and 6 moderate Republicans have gotten together, and they have an alternative plan that does balance the budget. In fact, it has even greater cuts than the Republican budget by almost, in fact, over $200 billion. And that decreases the tax cut to minus $90 billion. So they actually increase revenues instead of decreasing revenues. And I'm not sure exactly how. And that group is called the Coalition. And basically, when Friday hit, a couple days before that, the new CBO figures looked like they had something to work with, and they could have started moving closer and closer together. And all of a sudden, on Friday, the Republicans made a demand that the president completely take his cards and throw them on the table and show his tax cut in balance with the CBO figures. And if they didn't, the Republicans weren't going to give in, weren't going to provide another offer, weren't going to move on Medicare, Medicaid, or even on those tax cuts. And it busted up the meeting collapsed, and we were on our way to having 260,000 federal workers, again, used as pawns in a really stupid and petty political game by people who think they're just a lot more important than they really are. And that's what happened. Now, to both the credit of the Republicans and the Democrats, they did offer continuing resolutions in the Senate on December 17th, which I believe is Friday or Saturday. Dole offered to reopen the government for 1 week if the president signed or the Democrats agreed to pass a spending bill in the Department of Labor. Now, unfortunately, that spending bill included an extraneous issue, which was getting rid of executive rule against replacing striking workers on federal projects. Apparently, a long time ago, the president had struck down a Republican law that allowed owners and businessmen to just fire strikers and replace them permanently. And there was an executive order that this would not be allowed or tolerated on federal projects. And the Republicans had to throw their 2 cents in and threw that into one of the spending bills. Now, the Democrats didn't agree to that, but they put forward their own 1 week extension, continuing resolution, that basically had no other little things. It was just a clean extension bill, but only for a week for the negotiators to get together. That was rejected by Senator Dole, and the furlough is on. Furlough 2. It's a lot like Halloween 2, except it's only scary for the few people that are affected. Everybody else really doesn't care. Even the Grand Canyon is going to remain open. They made a deal with Governor Symington of Arizona so that he could take over a couple of the most popular sites with state workers and keep the Grand Canyon open. And so that, isn't even an impact. A lot of tourists are being impacted, and if the furlough goes past Thursday, the veterans checks are not going to go out, and that's going to irritate a lot of people. It's hard to say how many, but I'm sure that a lot of people will be irritated, and I certainly would if I was a veteran and depended on veterans' disability checks. So that's an impact. Social Security workers that process are not being furloughed this time. There's about 260,000 furloughed workers. If you get caught up in a furlough, now how does this affect the people in this area right here in southern Arizona? Most of the federal workers are work for the Defense Department one way or the other. So the workers at Davis-Monthan, the workers at Fort Huachuca, the workers for the Defense Contract Management Command and the Defense Contract Audit Agency, their appropriation has been passed and they will not be affected. There are many other people, especially the Department of the Interior, that are going to be affected. And if you are furloughed, here's a couple facts that you ought to know that might put your mind at least a little bit at ease. I know that they paid the last furlough, and there was a lot of criticism about it, but it's not an absolute assured situation that you're going to get paid this time around. As far as your retirement is concerned, a furlough has to last 6 months or longer before it will affect the time served on your retirement. A furlough of 6 months or less doesn't make any difference at all. For any time 12 months or shorter, your enrollment and the government contribution will continue for your FEHB health benefit. So don't worry about that. Similarly, your life insurance. Your coverage will continue for 12 consecutive months in a non-pay status without any cost to you or to the agency. Within grade increases. This is the only area where a furlough of a couple weeks can actually affect your future. If you are only at step 2 through 4 of a GS scale, an aggregate of 2 weeks in non-pay status is creditable toward your advancement. Longer than that is not. If you're from steps 5 through 7, it's 4 weeks, and 8 through 10 is 6 weeks. After that, not really true. For blue-collar workers, it's an aggregate of 1 work week for step 2. So if it lasts more than a week, wage grade worker can actually be affected. Annual and sick leave, when an employee accumulates 80 hours in unpaid status, annual sick and leave credits are reduced by an amount equal to the amount of leave earned during that pay period. So you're not earning leave during your furlough. High 3, an employee's average highest 3 years of pay for computing an annuity is not affected if the furlough lasts less than 6 months. So it's not going to affect your high 3 for retirement. If you're injured during a furlough, you're not on workman's comp. That's your own time, and that is a problem for you. If you have your time and grade, all the furlough time counts towards your time and grade. So you don't have to worry about that. So those are a few things that affect you if you are under a furlough situation. And I don't think that works too much in our benefit. Under 6 months, though, most of the basic benefits that you have are safe. It's funny because a couple of weeks ago there was already an article in the Federal Employees News Digest, which I encourage federal employees to get. It has a lot of pretty good information that basically told everybody that if you're a member of an unpopular agency, you're probably going to get furloughed if there's another furlough. And sure enough, this has definitely come true. Commerce and EPA are among the people that are getting furloughed. The Republicans hate the EPA because it's an environmental regulation, and they don't particularly like Commerce because they've been trying to shut down that agency in the last budget. Some of the agencies that have had appropriations bills, meaning that if you work for these agencies, you are safe. You will not be furloughed. Our agricultural department, in fact, I think that they were okay the last time around, includes the FDA, agriculture, energy and water development, Army Corps of Engineers, and so on. If you belong to the legislative branch, and I really doubt very seriously if too many people in our area are, but the Congress itself, their staffers, the General Accounting Organization, GAO, the Congressional Budget Office, I hope they stay working because they're the basis of the agreement if it comes by. The GPO that puts out all the little articles and so on and so forth, the Library of Commerce, they're all safe. They're not going to get furloughed. Military construction are safe. Transportation Department is safe. The Treasury and Postal area, which is the Treasury Department, includes the IRS, they're safe. Executive Office of the President, the Federal Election Commission, Federal Labor Relations Agency, General Services Agency that gets the space for our offices, Office of Personnel Management, the archives, and a whole bunch of other things. Things that are hung up in Congress and were hung up 2 weeks ago and are still hung up. As a matter of fact, the President has just vetoed 2 more appropriations bills are Commerce, Justice, and State. And that's one big bill. That includes the Commerce Department, the Justice Department. Although many of the agencies that are under the Justice Department are law enforcement, and they're considered non-emergency or unfurloughable or exempt, or whatever the wording that we use nowadays. And they're going to be there. So if you work for the FBI, you're probably going to be okay. Same thing with the federal marshals. But the Justice Department as a whole is probably going to be under the furlough. For what's worse for our area is the Interior Department is still under furlough, just like it was last time. As I said, the state has taken over a couple sites in the south rim of the Grand Canyon so that tourists can still go because so much of Northern Arizona's economy is dependent on the Grand Canyon. They couldn't afford to let that go. But Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, National Park, those people are up for it. Border Patrol is probably going to be okay, even though I believe the Border Patrol is part of the Justice Department. Labor and Education was never signed. That's where most of the people furloughed are going to come out of. Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, the Veterans, the housing agencies, HUD, the EPA, the FDIC, NASA, and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. They're probably going to be under a furlough. So the District of Columbia workers are going to be under furlough. And last but not least, Foreign Operations, the Agency for International Development, the State Department. We may have a few State Department workers here processing passports. I don't believe so, but we do have a federal building that possibly has some State Department workers, and they would be under threat of a furlough as well. So basically, unpopular agencies are in trouble, and agencies where there are controversies, even as silly as little abortion bills and things like that got thrown into appropriations bills where they don't belong, are causing a lot of people to be inconvenienced and a lot of Christmases to be ruined. So that's basically the situation that we got right now. And a lot of people are furloughed right into Christmas. Could happen again just for a few days. Last one was a 6-day shutdown, 4 days during a working week, actually pretty much a complete working week. And this one is in its third day. Doesn't look like there's been any progress today. As a matter of fact, everybody's still just running through their usual recriminations, and no progress has really occurred. What are some of the issues that are being discussed, or that would be discussed if they would just get off their behinds and get to work, which is more than I can say about our political structure right now. Oddly enough, I haven't heard any polls. I don't think that the American people are that inconvenienced this time. Until Thursday, which could be an important turning point, because on Thursday, the veterans with disabilities who are dependent on those veterans checks, those checks are probably not going to be processed unless they declare those people unfurloughed or exempt from furloughed. One thing that was very interesting was Gore and Clinton sent through an apology to the federal workers that got furloughed the last time around, and this was a couple of weeks after the furlough, and they acknowledged that people were embarrassed about the term non-essential, and that was causing a lot of criticism of federal workers, and a lot of loss of morale, and just it was insulting. And I have to admit, having been one of those non-essential federal workers who got furloughed the last time, it was insulting, and it is insulting. This time around, they're going to be referred to officially as simply furloughed. Now, I've noticed that the news hasn't picked that up, that they're still saying the word non-essential and getting a real kick out of it as well. Those who are going to work are no longer called essential, and their egos may be hurt. They're simply exempt from the furlough. So that's basically how that turned out. I'm going to ask my friend over here whether this is still on. Do you know if the signal went through at all? Okay, so the signal never did go through. Do you have any idea when my 30 minutes is going to be up? Oh, okay. No, my clock isn't working. Yeah, the 26 minutes didn't go through. Okay, that's no problem. It's just the gremlins, and at least this is getting up on my own tape, which is just fine with me. And who knows? This may be copied and put on the air during a week when I'm not here in person, and we can relive furlough 2, the second furlough. There are a couple other issues that I was going to bring up over here, and some of those are just how is this affecting the populace at large, and how is this affecting the Republicans? Because here they've run this revolution. They've taken over the Congress. They've said, we are just going to change everything. We're going to slash entitlements. We're going to take the entitlement status away from the welfare recipients and from the Medicaid recipients, and we're going to completely change the way government is being run. And if people get hurt, well, this is a revolution. That's just the way it is. And the people are behind us, and they said that over and over and over again. And it's very, very interesting because I have an article here about a fellow named Martin Anderson, who's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, and he predicted the Republican win in Congress, that the Republicans would actually take the House, which was probably the least expected because the Republicans have taken the Senate within the last 40 years. They never have taken the House until now, over a 40-year span of time. And he had predicted very, very accurately that they were going to win 250 seats, or no, wait a second, let me get to the right one. They were going to win 235 seats for a total pickup of 230 seats, and would gain control of the House of Representatives. And this was a tremendous historical change. He has done a study, and his prediction for 1996 election, if it were held today, now this can change a lot because the Democrats could blow it, and Clinton could get unpopular, the Bosnia situation could blow up in everybody's face, which would be very, very unfortunate. And there's 1,000 things that can happen. The economy can turn sour. The markets could go down, and the stock market did go down 100 points today. There's all kinds of things that could affect the current situation. But if it were held today, the Republicans would lose the House. The Democrats would win 250 of the 435 seats, and they would gain the House, and Newt Gingrich would be dumped as the Speaker of the House. So I guess Bonnier would end up being Speaker if it were held today. And I don't believe that the Republicans are doing themselves any good by not compromising on this budget. There's a lot of room for movement. The Republicans could offer to reduce that tax cut. Some of those tax cuts hurt the working poor and help only the rich, and really don't need to be in there. So I don't think they're doing themselves any good. And it's too bad that they took a situation that could have been fine and made it worse. This is Reed Silverne with Fed Pride. Thank you very much. I don't know if anybody heard me, but I'll be on January 8th. Bye.